Hello, this is Ed Davis, Superintendent of Union County Public Schools, and this is the last in what we feel will be a series of videos about the 2011-2012 budget. As many of you know, we've produced other videos that inform the public about the situation that Union County Public Schools was facing with the 2011-2012 school budget. In this video presentation, I hope to remind the public, our teachers, our staff, our students, and our parents of the challenges we were facing this year, decisions that were made by the governmental entities at the federal, state, and local level, and then how those decisions, those budgetary decisions, impacted the operating budget for the Union County Public Schools for the 2011-2012 school year. In the end, I hope to also encapsulate some of the challenges that we face not only in the coming year, but for the 2012-2013 budget as well. We hope that you find this video to be informative, and we appreciate the support of the public in the challenges that we face in the Union County Public Schools. Thank you. Again, the purpose of this presentation is to inform the public of the impact of the federal, state, and local budget cuts on Union County Public Schools for the 2011-2012 school year. Just to remind the public about the challenges that we faced in 11-12, we were potentially looking at the loss of $5.4 million in federal funds. This was part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding, and that primarily went to IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act. That's our Exceptional Children's Programs and Title I programs. Also, we were looking at the potential loss of $23.7 million in state funding. Now, this was due largely to the state budget deficit and the loss of the ARA funding that went to states. And the potential was there for an $8 million loss of funding because of the local county budget deficit. Before we look at decisions that were made, I think it's important to review the budget development process. We felt all along that it was very important that we involve all our stakeholders in this process. And we did receive feedback from school site-based teams. We talked with the Professional Advisory Council, which is made up of a teacher representative from each school. I had meetings with teacher assistants. We had a couple of meetings with the Superintendent and Student Advisory Council to get their feedback. And we had a series of parent cluster forums where we went into each of the clusters or attendance areas throughout the system, and the budget was the topic of discussion. We asked parents for their questions, for their concerns, for their suggestions, and for their feedback. In addition to this, principals met with school site-based teams. They also met with their fellow cluster principals, and then they met by levels at the elementary, middle, and high. The Budget Development Committee, which consisted of senior staff at the central office, principal representatives, teacher representatives, and we had a teacher assistant on that committee also, met several times throughout the year, beginning in October 2010 through April of 2011, and we went through a detailed process where we looked at each area of concern, each line item in the school system's budget, and looked at priorities and considerations, and looked at everything we'd received from all the stakeholders in making those decisions about the budget on what we'd recommend to the Board of Education Finance Committee, and ultimately what would go to the Board of Education for their consideration. In addition to this, I, along with Board of Education Chair, Mr. Dean Arp, we traveled to Raleigh on 3 occasions to meet with members of our General Assembly. Also, we met numerous times with the County Manager and the County Commission Chair to discuss the local budget and its potential impact on Union County Public Schools. Senior staff continued to work with the recommendations of the Budget Development Committee, and we determined some final recommendations that I would take to the Board of Education Finance Committee. The Board of Education Finance Committee met on several occasions to discuss these recommendations and then made recommendations to the Board of Education. These were approved. The local budget decisions were approved on May 10th, 2011, and the state budget decisions were approved on July 12th, 2011. First, the impact of the federal budget. The federal budget, as we anticipated, there was a reduction of $5.4 million. This impacted the Union County Public Schools in the following manner. We lost 23 exceptional children's teachers, 16 exceptional children's teacher assistants, and 26 positions in Title I schools were eliminated. The state budget. Union County Public Schools was cut by $18.8 million. Now, this is less than it could have been, but still a challenge nonetheless. This included cuts in various line item areas as well as an $11.5 million discretionary cut. Now let me explain the discretionary cut. This is where money is allocated to the school system by the Department of Public Instruction through funding from the General Assembly, but we are then asked and tasked with giving back and making decisions about giving back funds to the state. And $11.5 million was the total that we had to return to the state this year. That was up from approximately $8.3 million that had to be returned last year. Now this impacted the Union County Public Schools budget in the following manner. One central office position was cut. We cut 14 non-instructional positions. This is things such as custodians and clerical. And we actually here were able to reduce the terms of employment for many of our custodians and our clerical staff, and this helped quite a bit in being able to retain positions, but it helped us overall in being able to meet the objectives of this cut. 4 assistant principal positions were cut.
We also lost funding in several line item areas. We lost $176,254 in the area of driver education.
Happened with this is our students are going to have to pay for a portion of the cost for driver's education. We've looked at this issue, and it's going to be tough to be able to avoid doing this. This will be a fee that will have to be passed along to the students, and we're authorized to charge the students up to $45 to take driver's education. We also lost over $500,000 in technology funding at the state level, and you can see the figure there, $548,514. There was a loss of low wealth funding. Now we're part of the low wealth consortium. This is a complicated formula that the state uses to look at districts that need additional funding from the state to supplement their educational programs. And because of where we fell out with the formula, or where we sort of equated to in this year's formula, this was a loss of $239,296 in low wealth funding. Now this impacts primarily our high priority or our Title I schools. We also lost a total of $297,384 in transportation funding, and there was a loss of over $800,000, $861,328 to be exact, in instructional supplies funding. This will impact all schools, and that equates to about a 46% reduction in instructional materials and supplies allotment from the state. Union County Public Schools, we were able to greatly minimize the impact, the direct impact on personnel in the classroom, teachers and teacher assistants, which in all our work was the priority as far as positions, and the $7.5 million in federal EduJobs money allowed us to greatly mitigate this. However, the sobering fact here is these funds will not be available to our school system in 2012-13. So unless something changes drastically, we anticipate that teacher and teacher assistant positions could be impacted to a much greater extent in the 2012-2013 budget. Also, with regard to the state budget, the More at 4, which is an award-winning preschool program that all the research shows that it's been very effective, it was moved from the Department of Public Instruction to the Division of Health and Human Services, and its focus and funding formulas were changed dramatically. Due to these changes, we no longer can afford to be a host school district and to be a More at 4 contractor. This will more than likely be done by the local daycare providers, the private daycare providers. This money will probably go to them to provide those services. This impacted teachers and teacher assistants working in this program in Union County Public Schools, and certainly will impact our students. And we're greatly concerned about this and the long-range impact this will have. But at this time, this was cost prohibitive for the school system to continue this program under its new funding formula. With regard to the local budget, we received $79.5 million for current expense or operating budget for 11-12, and this was the same amount we received in 10-11. However, the catch here is that we did not receive any funding for capital outlay. These are things such as purchase of buses, maintenance of our buildings, technology, furniture and equipment. And because of this, we had to have at least an operational level of capital outlay funding. We had to have some money to work with capital outlay to address some of these needs. And we had to go into our current expense budget and to make some cuts there to provide some level of funding for our capital needs. To provide at least a basic level of funding for capital outlay, these were the cuts that were made in the local budget, the current expense or operational budget. We cut central services directors and supervisors by $180,000. Maintenance personnel and supplies were cut by $100,000. Furniture and equipment by $80,000. Computer equipment by $170,000. Supplies and materials by almost $500,000, $453,000. Media assistants at our elementary level, those positions were cut. That equated to $884,000, and this was a decision that was tough to make, but it was a unanimous decision by the Budget Development Committee to look at doing this. We cut assistant principals also from the local budget. That equated to 2 assistant principal positions. And then we regretted to have to do this, but we did have to make some reductions in the master's degree and national board teacher supplements. Just 2 years ago, those supplements were $2,000, had to be reduced to $1,800 last year, and are now down to $1,500 this year. And again, these cuts were made to provide at least a basic level of funding for our capital outlay needs. Again, those are things like buses and maintenance and technology and furniture equipment and so forth.